biblical story of the fall of the Walls of Jericho is one of the most well-known and dramatic accounts in the Old Testament. The city of Jericho, with its imposing fortifications, was the first major obstacle that the Israelites faced as they sought to conquer the land of Canaan, the promised land that God had pledged to their ancestor Abraham centuries earlier. According to the book of Joshua in the Bible, the Israelites, led by the military commander Joshua, marched around the city for 7 days, with the priests carrying the Ark of the Covenant and blowing ram's horns. On the 7th day, after the Israelites had circled the city 7 times, the walls of Jericho miraculously collapsed, allowing the Israelites to swarm into the city and conquer it. This dramatic event is often seen as a decisive moment in the Israelites' journey to possess the land of Canaan, as well as a powerful demonstration of God's might and the Israelites' faith. But how exactly did the walls of Jericho fall? What was the nature of the city's fortifications, and what strategies did the Israelites employ to bring them down? In this video, we'll delve into the archaeological evidence and historical context to better understand this famous biblical event. Let's start by looking at the city of Jericho itself. Situated in the Jordan Valley, near the Dead Sea, Jericho was an ancient city with a long history, dating back to around 9000 BCE. By the time of the Israelite conquest, around 1400 BCE, Jericho was a thriving urban center, with a population estimated to be around 2,000 to 3,000 people. The city was protected by a formidable system of fortifications. Jericho was surrounded by a massive stone wall, measuring around 13 feet, 4 meters, in height and 6 feet, 2 meters, in width. This wall was further reinforced by a second, outer wall, creating a defensive barrier that was highly effective against traditional ancient siege tactics. Archaeologists have also discovered the remains of a deep, steep-sided ditch or moat that surrounded the outer wall, making it even more difficult for attackers to reach the city's defenses. This moat was likely filled with water, creating an additional obstacle for potential invaders. Given the strength of Jericho's fortifications, it's understandable that the Israelites would have viewed the city as a formidable challenge. After all, the Israelites were a band of former slaves, not a seasoned military force. How could they possibly hope to overcome such a well-defended city? According to the biblical account, the Israelite strategy was not a conventional military assault, but rather a display of faith and obedience. The Lord instructed Joshua to have the Israelites march around the city for 7 days, with the priests carrying the Ark of the Covenant and blowing ram's horns. On the 7th day, after the Israelites had circled the city 7 times, the walls of Jericho miraculously collapsed, allowing the Israelites to swarm into the city and conquer it. This account has long puzzled scholars and historians, who have struggled to reconcile the biblical narrative with the archaeological evidence. After all, the idea of walls simply collapsing at the sound of horns and the marching of an army seems to defy the laws of physics and military strategy. However, recent archaeological discoveries and historical analysis have shed new light on the possible mechanisms behind the fall of Jericho's walls. One of the most intriguing theories involves the use of a relatively simple but effective military tactic, the undermining of the city's foundations. Excavations at the site of ancient Jericho have revealed that the city's walls were built on a foundation of loose, unstable soil, rather than on solid bedrock. This would have made the walls vulnerable to destabilization, particularly if the Israelites were able to undermine the foundations in some way. According to this theory, the Israelites may have used a combination of natural and human-made methods to weaken the wall's foundations. For example, they could have diverted water from the nearby Jordan River to create a series of small but persistent landslides and erosion around the base of the walls. This gradual undermining of the foundations may have eventually led to the collapse of the walls, just as the biblical account describes. Another possibility is that the Israelites used a more direct approach, such as digging tunnels or trenches beneath the walls to remove the soil and destabilize the foundations. This type of tactic, known as a sapping, was a common siege strategy in the ancient world, and it would have been well within the capabilities of the Israelites, who were skilled at tasks like construction and engineering. It's also worth considering the psychological and strategic factors that may have contributed to the fall of Jericho's walls. The biblical account suggests that the Israelites' march around the city for 7 days, accompanied by the blowing of ram's horns, was meant to inspire fear and demoralize the city's defenders. This strategy of psychological warfare, combined with the gradual undermining of the wall's foundations, may have ultimately led to the collapse of Jericho's formidable defenses. Interestingly, the archaeological evidence seems to support the idea that Jericho's walls did not fall due to a single, catastrophic event, but rather as the result of a more gradual process of deterioration and destabilization. Excavations at the site have revealed that the walls did not collapse all at once, but rather in a more piecemeal fashion, with different sections falling at different times. This gradual collapse of the walls may have been further exacerbated by the fact that Jericho was already in a state of decline at the time of the Israelite invasion. The city had experienced a series of natural disasters and political upheavals in the centuries leading up to the conquest, leaving its defenses weakened and its population demoralized. In this context, the Israelites' strategy of encircling the city and using psychological warfare may have been a highly effective way of exploiting Jericho's existing vulnerabilities and ultimately bringing down its formidable walls. The biblical account of the walls collapsing at the sound of the ram's horns may be a symbolic representation of this more complex and gradual process of deterioration and conquest. Of course, the biblical narrative of the fall of Jericho is not just a historical account, but also a powerful theological story that speaks to the Israelites' faith in God and the fulfillment of the divine promise to give them the land of Canaan. The idea of the walls collapsing miraculously at the sound of the Israelites' horns and shouts is a powerful symbol of God's intervention and the Israelites' obedience to His commands. In this sense, the fall of Jericho can be seen as a pivotal moment in the Israelites' journey to possess the promised land, a triumph of faith over seemingly insurmountable odds. The biblical account emphasizes the Israelites' reliance on God's power and guidance, rather than their own military might, as the key to their victory. It's important to note, however, that the biblical narrative of the fall of Jericho is not without controversy. Some scholars have challenged the historical accuracy of the account, arguing that the archaeological evidence does not fully support the biblical timeline or the details of the conquest. There are also debates around the ethical implications of the Israelites' conquest of Canaan, which involved the destruction of cities and the killing of their inhabitants. Nonetheless, the story of the fall of Jericho remains one of the most iconic and enduring biblical narratives, capturing the imagination of readers and scholars alike. Whether one views it as a literal historical event or a symbolic representation of deeper theological truths, the collapse of Jericho's walls continues to fascinate and inspire. In conclusion, the fall of the walls of Jericho remains a complex and multifaceted event, one that has been the subject of intense scholarly and theological scrutiny for centuries. While the biblical account presents a dramatic and miraculous narrative, recent archaeological and historical analysis has shed new light on the potential mechanisms behind the collapse of Jericho's formidable defenses. By considering the city's vulnerable foundations, the Israelites' strategic and psychological warfare tactics, and the broader context of Jericho's decline, we can gain a deeper understanding of how this famous biblical event may have unfolded. Ultimately, the fall of Jericho remains a powerful and enduring symbol of faith, divine intervention, and the Israelites' journey to possess the promised land.